Hey everyone, I'm Rohit and I'm the head of DevRel at Reown. WalletConnect Inc. is now known as Reown, and Reown has two major product offerings. They are AppKit and WalletKit. So imagine if you're building a cool blockchain application, and with AppKit you can make it super easy for your users to do everything from within the application without ever needing to leave it. So they can swap tokens, log in with their email address and social accounts like Google, Twitter, or Farcaster, approve transactions with a simple click, and buy crypto and also get important notifications all from within your application. And WalletKit is a tool that helps Wallet talk to different applications on the blockchain, and it makes it super easy for you to do things like approve transactions with just one tap, get important messages and notifications for your favorite apps, and it also helps you stay safe from bad actors that use phishing links on their wallet applications. All of this happens smoothly without you ever needing to do a lot of extra work. So for the sake of this tutorial, our primary focus would be AppKit. So we will be building a simple Next app that will allow you to connect your wallet to any EVM chain. And yeah, let's get started. Now I'm going to open VS Code, and now we need to create our Next app. So I'm going to run npx create Next app at latest. And you also need to give the application's name. So I'm going to give it as AppKit example, and you press enter. Now it's going to ask you a few questions. So yes, we would like to use TypeScript. So I'm going to select it as yes. I'm going to set ESLint to no, and I'm going to use Tailwind CSS, so it's a yes. I'll skip using the CRC directory for the sake of simplicity. And yes, we would like to use the app router, and for this it'll be no. So give it a few seconds and it should install or create the next application with the name as AppKit example. After that, we need to install a few other dependencies and packages that will be necessary to run our Web3 application. And you can see that it has already created the next app. So let me change into that directory by typing cd appkit example. And now I'm going to open that on VS Code. And you can see that our app has been set up, and this is our boilerplate Next application. So I'm going to open the terminal on this as well. And like I mentioned, you need to import the packages. And for that, you need to first install the dependencies in the packages. And in order to do that, you need to run npm install @reown appkit @reown appkit adapter Wagmi. And we also need to install Wagmi, and then we need to install TanStack for our React query. So for the sake of this tutorial, I'll be using my preferred Ethereum library as Wagmi. However, you could also use Ethers. So after I'm done typing this, I'm going to press enter, and it's going to install these dependencies in about a minute, so please wait patiently. Okay, so as you can see, our dependencies have been successfully installed. So now we need to get a project ID before we proceed, because this project ID is what is going to help us set up our AppKit. So you need to navigate to cloud.reown.com. So since I have already logged in, I do not need to sign up, but if you haven't signed up, please sign up. And now it'll ask you to create a project. So please navigate to the project tab and click on create project. Let me give the name as AppKit example and click on continue. When you click on continue, it'll ask you to select the product preference that you would like to start working with. The SDK that we are using, like I mentioned, is AppKit. So I'm going to select AppKit and click on next. The framework that we're using is Next.js. So I'm going to select that, and then I'm going to click on create. This should essentially create a project ID for us. Okay, so as you can see, our project has been set up, and this is where the project ID can be found. So please copy that, and now you can switch back to your VS Code, and at the root level of your code directory, please create a new file, which is .env. And now you need to create a variable that says next public project ID is equal to, and paste your project ID. And now that we have our environment variable configured, which means we can proceed with configuring the rest of the application. So I'm going to close this, and at the root level of our code directory, we need to create a new folder called config. And within this, you need to create a new file, which would be index.tsx. And within this index.tsx file, which is there in your config folder, is where we would create the Wagmi adapter, which will be used as a configuration for our AppKit app. Okay, so now let's get started with the import statements. So we first need to import a few things. So let me import things like cookie storage and create storage from Wagmi. And after this, you need to import Wagmi adapter from Reown AppKit adapter Wagmi. And you also need to import the chains that you need to work with. So in this case, I'm going to import mainnet and Arbitrum. And this needs to be imported from @Reown AppKit /networks. And after you're done with this, we can proceed with the next line. And here you need to get your project ID and configure it. So I'm going to give the statement as export const project ID is equal to process.env.next public project ID. And you can also check if the project ID is being retrieved properly or not by giving a simple if loop. So if it is not being retrieved properly, you need to throw an error. So you do this by typing throw new error, project ID is not defined. And after this, you need to export a new constant variable, which would be your networks. So let's declare that as mainnet and Arbitrum. So after this, you need to set up the Wagmi adapter. You do this by creating another constant variable which would be exported. So let me name it as Wagmi adapter is equal to new Wagmi adapter. This is where you call the function that you just imported on the top. And here you can set the storage as a create storage function. And here you can pass storage as cookie storage. And you can also set the SSR to true. And now you need to pass the networks and also the project ID for it to function as expected. And you can see that we have set up the Wagmi adapter. And you could also export another constant variable, which would be your config. And this config needs to be Wagmi adapter dot Wagmi config. And this is what our index.tsx within our config folder would look like. And now within the root directory, you need to create a new folder, which would be the context. So you need to name it as context. And within this, again, you need to create a new index.tsx file. So this will basically be the context provider that we want to wrap our application in and initialize AppKit. So as usual, you need to import a few of the statements. But before that, you need to make sure that you use client, which is necessary for Next. And now we need to import things like Wagmi adapter from config, since you're exporting that and we need this for our context provider. And you also need to import project ID. After this, you need to import create AppKit, which is the function we will use to initiate AppKit and also create the instance. And again, we need to import the chains. So I'm going to import mainnet and Arbitrum from Reown /AppKit /networks. And you also need to import a few other things like query client from Tanstack, and you also need to import query client provider. And you also need to import React, and then I'm going to import type React node from React. And we also need to import a function to initialize the cookie state. So I'm going to import cookie to initial state from Wagmi. And you also need to import Wagmi provider and then type config. These are all our import statements. And now you need to set up the query client, and you do this by typing const query client is equal to new query client. This calls the query client function and assigns it to this constant variable. And you can again pass the same if loop to check if the project ID is properly being fetched or not. So I'm going to go back to the previous file and copy this error statement to save some time. And after this, you need to set up a metadata variable. Please note that the metadata variable is completely optional. However, the metadata variable is what will contain the information about your application that is being used by AppKit. So this includes the name, the URL, the description, and the icons to be used for your application. So I'm going to do this regardless of whether it's optional or not. So you need to pass the name. So I'm going to set the name as AppKit example, and then a description like I mentioned before. So I'm going to set the description as AppKit example EVM. And now I need to set a URL for our app, and this could be anything. So I'm just going to give it as example app.com, but you need to replace this with the actual app's URL, and you need to set the icons. So I'm just going to copy an icon that I already have in a URL format, but feel free to replace that. And this is how you create the metadata variable that will be passed within the modal that we create soon. So now we need to create the modal like I mentioned before. So that'll be another constant variable, and here you call the create AppKit function, and within create AppKit function is where you will configure the adapter that we created in our config file. So you set the adapters as Wagmi adapter, and you also need to pass the project ID. And then now you need to configure the networks as what you imported. So I'm going to configure it with mainnet and Arbitrum. You could also set a default network object, which will specify the default network to use. So I'm going to set it to mainnet. And now I'm going to pass a few optional features, such as analytics. So if you set analytics to true, it will fetch all the analytics from your application and show it under your project on Reown's cloud. And after this, you could also set things like email to true. So email is true by default. However, I'm just showing it for an example. And you could also set socials to enable social login. So this is how you need to pass it. So I'm going to first have Google, and then I'm going to have X, and then I'm going to have GitHub, and then I'm going to have Discord, and you could also do this for Farcaster. However, this is also completely optional. It depends on whether you want to enhance the user experience for your web application. And I'm also going to set email show wallets to true. And after this, you could also set the theme mode. So the theme mode is basically to configure what is the theme of your application. Is it dark or light? So I'm going to set it to dark. I'm going to set it to light. And this is what the body of our index.tsx within the context folder should look like. And now you need to pass a function that sets the context provider. So I'm just going to copy and paste the boilerplate code that I have, but feel free to take a look at what it looks like. So it's a context provider that has children and cookies as the prop objects, and then it returns the Wagmi provider, within which the query client provider is wrapped. And you need to save this. So now let's open the page.tsx and configure the front end for our web application. So again, I'm going to use client here since it's necessary. And then I'm going to import use account from Wagmi. This is completely optional because I'm going to use this to check if the wallet address is connected or not. So now I'm going to copy a default boilerplate function that I already had. So I'm going to minimize this so you can see what it looks like. And you can see that I'm returning this as my body, within which you need to pass the Web3 model button. So the W3M button is what will show your users a connect wallet button, and the W3M network button is just to switch the network. And after you've done this, you also need to change the layout of your application. So I'm going to remove all this and again copy and paste a simple boilerplate code. So this sets the layout of our application. And I'm going to quickly walk back to the page.tsx file. Here, please note that all of these components are nothing but styling. However, feel free to remove those and you could just pass the W3M button and you'll still be able to see a connect wallet button that you'll be able to connect your wallet to and also disconnect. So now in order to run your next application, you need to run this command, which is npm run dev. Since I already have an existing application running which uses the exact same code, I'm going to show what it looks like on my localhost 3000. So I'm going to set it to localhost 3000 and open the example application. And you could see that this is what it'll look like. It'll show a connect wallet button. So now I'm going to select connect, and you can see that the social login methods and also the email address login is enabled. And you could see also the other installed wallet providers that are there in my browser's extensions. So I'm going to log in with MetaMask, and it's going to pop up MetaMask, and I select the account that I want to connect my application with, and then I press on confirm. And you could see that the network selection button has also been enabled. So when you click on this, you'll see the other network that is available, which is Arbitrum. But you could always go back to VS Code. And here, when you're passing networks, you basically need to import the other networks that you want your application to support from Reown AppKit network and pass it through the create AppKit function. And you also need to set it to the Wagmi adapter function. And that's pretty much it. And that's what you need to do to support other networks on your Web3 application. And when you click on this connection modal, you could see that there's an option to on-ramp, which means you could buy crypto. And there's also an option to swap. You could also see activity, which fetches the activity for my wallet address. And that's about it. And that's it. You have now learned how to create a simple Next application using AppKit and let your users connect to any EVM chain. So happy hacking.